My name is Simone. UNL is ending the celebration of Black History Month strong with an evening with critically acclaimed author Wes Moore. Wes Moore, who has had many accomplishments as an author, is even more than that. He is a Rhodes Scholar, a veteran, and he is also the founder and CEO of Bridge EDU, an innovative college platform that addresses the college completion and job placement crisis. Wes Moore has been listed on the New York Times bestseller twice for his books, The Work and The Other Wes Moore. He has also made appearances in USA Today, Time Magazine, People Magazine, Meet the Press, The Colbert Report, MSNBC, and NPR, among many other news outlets. Moore is also the host of Beyond Belief on the Oprah Winfrey Network, and the executive producer and host of PBS's Coming Back with Wes Moore, which focuses on the reintegration of Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans and their return home. We are not only lucky, but honored to have such a sought-after and successful speaker on our campus. Through Wes Moore's work, he has left his imprint on readers across the country. A wise man once said, "When it is time for you to leave this school, leave your job, or even leave this earth, you make sure you have worked hard to make sure it mattered you were even here." Without further ado, please help me welcome this wise man. Wes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Can if I stand over here, can everybody hear me still?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you so much. And for Simone, thank you so much for that beautiful, beautiful introduction. For those that don't know, Simone is like 8 jobs, man. No, seriously. Like, we're having a chance to talk with like the different organizations she's a part of, the work she does with DOJ. I'm like, yo, I know you got some Jamaican in you because you have like, because you got like 3 jobs right now, man. Seriously, I'm very, very proud of you and very thankful.
Excuse me.
Very, very thankful.
Could you go ahead and use the mic?
Oh, use the mic?
Otherwise, I won't get her on the tape.
Oh, sorry. Is this better? All right. I was saying Simone is Jamaican, so thank you for the beautiful introduction. Also, I just wanted to thank all the leadership here. You know, first, Dr. Freeman, who has been yelling at me all day long about how all day long has just been like, remember, be quick, be quick, be quick. And like 15 minutes later, he's just looking at me like, seriously, man? How many times I got to tell you be quick? So I apologize for being so insubordinate, but it's a real honor to have been with you all day. and Dr. Shipp, as always, thank you. Thank you for your leadership, but also thank you for making this conversation a priority. Oftentimes many people feel like it's easier just not to talk about complex and difficult things. Where it's just like, maybe if we just wait a little bit, things will kind of calm down or go away. It takes special leadership, it takes a special place, it takes a special institution to actually say, no, actually the thing we want to do is actually embrace hard stuff. Because if we're not embracing hard stuff, then what's the point of us even being here in the first place? Especially when we think about this dynamic of what it means to be higher educated, right? Because I'm a bit of a contrarian in a way, and y'all will see exactly what I mean in a second. But oftentimes when people talk about what is the virtue of higher education, people will immediately point towards things like degrees and diplomas and credentials. And I think that is incredibly important, right? But I would also make an argument that anyone who thinks that the goal of higher education is simply just to walk away with a piece of paper, then you're completely missing the point. Anyone who thinks that the goal of higher education is just simply to change the first line of your resume or to alter your LinkedIn profile, then you're really missing the point. Because I'm going to be very honest with you, I know people who have multiple degrees. I know people who have bachelors and masters and masters and doctors. I mean, they have entire alphabets after their last name, right? And I could stand here and make a very clear and distinct argument that they have yet to be higher educated. Because they have yet to figure out a way to make those degrees mean anything to anybody but themselves. Higher education will never simply be about how fast can you fill up your walls. How fast can you make framing companies rich? Higher education is how have you figured out a way to make those learnings actually mean something to your wider world? Who is it that you're going to choose to fight for? Who is it that you'll choose to stand for? Even when it's not simple. This is an institution that actually doesn't just understand it, but prides itself in it. All the different students that I have met here today, whether they were students who were part of the Veterans Cohort, and first, thank you all for the t-shirt. Appreciate it. This is really cool. I'm serious. I'm walking around with, what does UNO mean? I'm very proudly telling the story. Whether there were students of any form of background, any form of history that I had the chance and the pleasure of meeting today, these were all students who knew their stories actually mattered. And these are students who knew that you cannot tell the UNO story if their story is not also included in that. It's also about the others. And it's funny because when I first went through the process of writing the other Wes Moore, by the way, does someone have a copy? Can I borrow your book right quick, Dr. Freeman? Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Make sure you get that back.
For those that didn't hear, he said, make sure I get that back. I'm going to be like, okay, thank you so much. I will give it back to him. But when I first wrote the book, The Other Wes Moore, and by the way, I was so humbled to hear that I guess next year this is going to be the freshman year read, which I'm I always say, I always don't know how to feel when your book becomes mandatory reading. But I do appreciate it. But I remember when I first went through the process of writing this book, I didn't realize the way the publishing industry worked, right? When I saw a book, I was like, oh, isn't it wonderful that the author wrote that book? I had no idea that the way the publishing industry actually works is that everything you see on the inside of a book, all that, right? That's what the author wanted to share with the world. Author's ideas, author's thoughts, author's intents, right? Everything you see on the outside of a book, the cover, the title, the airbrushed author photos, right? All that is what the publisher wants to share. The publisher will legally hold on to the rights of everything over here. Legally. And they'll do it for a reason, because they know that is their only chance to market to you as the consumer. This is a publishing industry, right? And so they will do whatever it takes on the cover or the back to make someone say, oh, that actually looks interesting, and then walk over to the cash register and buy it, right? So they will legally hold on to those rights for a reason. Perfect example. Some people will ask, they're like, so is that you or is that Wes riding the bike on the book? The honest answer is, I have no idea who this kid is. I really don't. They first showed it to me and they're like, so what do you think? And I was like, who is that kid? And they're like, we like it because he's riding a bike and he's looking backwards. I was okay. And so they call me up and they're like, hey, Wes, can you come up on Monday? Because we want to have a conversation with you about your proposed book title, right? And I thought that a conversation meant the actual English definition of the word conversation, which was an exchange, right? I had no idea that this was their way. They were going to tell me what my new book title from what book was going to be. And so when they're like, I was like, all right, great. So I started doing like focus groups with my friends and family. I was like ordering pizza, having them over, like what should the title be? So I went up there like fully armed for what I thought the title of my book should be. So I sit down with them. There's this big oak table, and then all the suits were around there, and I sit down, and they're like, all right, Wes, and they start talking, and I kind of cut them off, and I said, listen, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. Because I've thought a lot about it, and there are about 6 titles that I really like. And I start rattling off these 6 titles. And then I look at them and I said, so y'all can go ahead and choose between any of those 6 titles. Because I'm good with any of them. And they kind of look at me and they look at each other and they look at me and they say, that's very kind of you. We think we have a better idea. And they said, what do you think about the other Wes Moore? And I said, that might be the dumbest book title that I've ever heard in my life. This is a true story. And they're like, what don't you like about it? I was like, there's a whole bunch of things I don't like about it. I said, well, let me go ahead and start with 3. Okay? First thing I told them I like about it was I said I try to make it very clear this story wasn't just about these 2 kids. So putting the name inside of the title of the book, are you not completely negating that entire fact? Right? That's one. The second thing, what self-respected author do you know that puts their own name inside of a title of a book that they've written? No one's, the other James Baldwin, the other Stephen King, the other J.K. Rowling. It sounds crazy. It does. And then the third thing I told them I like about it, I was like, listen, guys, no one knows who one Wes Moore is. So why does anybody care who the other Wes Moore is? And so when I said that to them, they started laughing, and they said to me, they're like, those are actually all really good points. They said, the problem, though, is that you're missing the point. Because you're absolutely right. It's not about you. It's not about him. The name is completely irrelevant. You can throw any name inside of that book title. It really does not matter. Because the truth is, there are Wes Moores that exist everywhere. There are Wes Moores in every one of our communities. There are Wes Moores in every one of our schools. There are Wes Moores in every one of our homes. People who are either one decision or one policy decision away from going in one direction or going in a completely different direction. People who every day are straddling this line of greatness, and the problem is they don't even know it. The most important thing about the title is not the name. The most important thing about the title is the other. When Dr. Shipp and I were talking earlier, he was saying that when he had the chance to have the book before, he would sign it to the students and say, don't forget about the others. The others. The people who might not look like us, might not speak like us, might come from a different part of town or a different part of the world, who might have a different family lineage, who might call their God a different name, who might love differently than we do. But people whose destiny matters as much to the long-term safety and security and greatness of every one of our communities as ours does. The others. When we think about the whole role of higher education, the point of higher education is not simply about getting out of here as quickly as possible with the fanciest degree possible. It's about understanding who is it that you will fight for? Who is it that you will advocate for when it's not easy or maybe it's not simple? Who will you either stand for or kneel for when it might not be simple or you might lose supporters because of it? Who will you choose to stand shoulder to shoulder with when it might at first just be you two standing there? But you're doing it because you feel like it's the right thing to do. The reason that everyone is so hopeful for each and every one of you is not because of what you did to get here. It's because of what you're going to do next and who it is that you will choose to fight for. And to be very honest, we're now entering a space. We're now entering a time where people are genuinely nervous and concerned about how they are viewed, about how they're thought of. And this is on all sides. How we make the space for them to understand that their views are heard. Their futures do matter. And at the same time, that while the world does not revolve around them, our world does not exist without them either. Who will we fight for? And frankly, I don't think it was something that I fully understood or fully grasped in many ways until I had to. Because I only have 2 memories of my father. First memory I had of my father was when I was about 4 years old. And I have an older sister who's like 6 years older than me. And I have a younger sister who's 13 months younger than me. And my mother had a bunch of rules in her house. But one of the big rules that she had in her house was that men do not put their hands on women. That's right. And the reason that I didn't know this till later on in life, but the reason that she was so insistent on that rule was because of her own past. And she always said, I will never tolerate it if I see it, and I especially will not tolerate it if I see it in my son. And now my older sister and I, we used to get into fights, and not like low fights. I'm talking like real fist, like Colin McGregor MMA like fights, right? And every time my mother would see us fight, she would always break us up, and no matter what was going on, it was always my fault, right? So she was always grabbing me up, and she was like, you do not put your hands on women, you do not put your hands on women. And I had to explain to her, I said, but Mommy, this is not a woman. That heathen over there is Nikki. And my mother didn't see the difference between the two. And so one day I'm sitting there and I'm minding my own business, and Nikki comes up to me and she starts blowing in my face. Like, and I told her to stop and she wouldn't stop. So finally she gets up and she runs away from me. And I get up and I run after her. And finally, as soon as I caught her, I cocked my fist back and I punched her. And as soon as I connected, I turned around and I saw my mom. So I knew it was about to get real bad real quick, right? So she starts coming after me and I'm running in the other direction. And we lived in a small house, but basically after my baby sister was born, they had a closet that they turned into a bedroom for me and my baby sister. And so in this bedroom was a small bed for me and a crib for my baby sister. And that was all that was in this room, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm running around the room and I'm trying to find a place to hide. And there's no place to hide in this room. So finally I just kind of sit down on the bed and I get myself mentally prepared for what was about to happen to me, all right? And then I start hearing this footsteps and I hear this knock on the door, and the door opens up, and then my father walked into the room. And when he walked into the room, he came in and he sat down on the bed next to me. And then he took me and he put me on his lap. And he started explaining to me what I'd done so wrong. And why my job is to protect women and to never put my hands on them. Why my job is to protect my family and to never go after them. And then he told me that I had to go downstairs to go apologize to my mother and to my sister, but he told me that he would come with me. And the thing that I remember most about that moment was he was a big guy, and I was holding on to his hand, and literally my whole hand wrapped around his fingers. And when he walked downstairs, he kind of had this funny way of walking because he stuck his chest out. And so I'm like 4 years old and I'm sticking my chest out too, because my father was everything that I ever wanted to be. And the only other memory that I have of him was about 6 months later when I watched him die. And as tough as I thought I had it, or as tough as I thought my sisters had it, the person who really had it toughest was my mom. Because now here she was in her 20s with 3 kids that she was going to raise on her own, and in no way was this the life that she had expected or the life that she prepared for. And she had a really difficult time with the transition. And then finally, after a couple of years, she called up my grandparents, her parents, and said that she needed help. And they gave her the answer that she was hoping they would give, which is send the kids up here and we can help out. And then my mom moved us up to go live with my grandparents up in the South Bronx, up in New York. And almost immediately as I got up there, I found myself getting lost. Where I was picking and choosing which days were worthwhile to go to school and which ones weren't. Hurting people that actually loved me so I could impress people that could care less about me. And by the time I was 11 years old was the first time that I felt handcuffs on my wrists. And by the time I was 13 years old, I found out that when my mom makes threats, that she's not playing. Because she'd been threatening with sending me away to military school ever since I was 8. And she'd be like, if you don't get it together, I'm gonna send you away. And I would look at it and I'd say, Mommy, I know, and I'm gonna work harder. And then when I was 9, she started giving me brochures to show me she wasn't playing around. So I look at the brochures and I was like, all right, Mommy, I know, I can see you're serious, I'm gonna work harder. And when I was 10 and 11 and 12, her threats kept coming, I kept on blowing them off. And then finally, when I was 13, she was like, I can't do this anymore, I'm gonna send you away. And I looked at her and I said, Mommy, I know, and I'm gonna work harder. And she's like, nah, you're going next week. And she started packing my stuff up. And honestly, like, I thought even when we got in the car, that she would just drive around the block a few times. Some like scared straight measure or something like that. And she drove all the way to Pennsylvania and she dropped me off at this school. And I let it be known to anybody who would listen to me that there's no point in you screaming and all that stuff at me because I'm not staying here. I mean, I was very, very clear to them, just like, listen, y'all are really wasting your time on me. Go waste your time on them other people because I'm gone. And so in the first 4 days, I ran away 5 times from the school. The second last time I tried to run away, it was actually because they drew me a map on how to get to the train station because it was so pathetic that I kept on getting lost on trying to find the train station. No, this is true. This is true. And so, because I remember my squad leader, Sergeant Austin, he walked into the room, called the room to attention, me and my roommate, and he told my roommate to get out. And my roommate grabbed his stuff and he ran out of the room and I'm standing at attention. I'm like, dang, this is not good. Because I'm like, whatever's about to happen next, he doesn't want witnesses. So I'm just standing at attention and Sergeant Austin tells me to sit down and he says to me, he's like, listen, Moore, it's obvious you don't want to be here. And quite honestly, we really don't want you here. So I've drawn you a map on how to get to the train station. And I'm looking at this map like he just handed me a lottery ticket, man. I'm seriously looking at this thing and there's tears welling up in my eyes. And I'm like, yo, I will never forget you. When you get out, let me know. We'll grab lunch. You know what I mean? Like, I was so excited. And he just tells me to get out of there. So late that night, I try to run out, and I run out into the forest, and I run out into the woods, and I'm following my map to a T, and the map is completely fake. They just enjoyed watching me do circles in the middle of the woods. And they were sitting there watching and laughing. And then they came out and they found me and they brought me back to campus, right? And the reason that I bring up that story, is, you know, oftentimes people will say, well, isn't it a great thing that you got sent away? Isn't it a great thing that you got sent away to a military school? As if that somehow was like the answer for me. And my point is, like, listen, I completely acknowledge the importance of that time and that space and that moment, because while nothing changed overnight by any stretch of the imagination, eventually I did begin to understand what it meant to be interconnected to something. Eventually I did begin to understand that the only way that I was going to make it was if my plea brothers were there to push me, and the only way they were going to make it was if I was there to push them, right? We needed each other. And the system is built that way. But I'm very clear to say that the answer isn't why don't we just hurry up and pick people up and move them around? I'm a very clear believer that what happened to me wasn't the fact that I was physically transported. I'm very clear to say that the second to last time I tried to run away, I started understanding that I was surrounded by people, both literally and figuratively, but people who would help set the path for me in a way that I didn't even understand it. What happened to me wasn't the fact that I was picked up and moved around. What happened to me was the fact that I found myself surrounded by people, starting with my mom and my grandparents, but eventually leading to this ridiculous string of role models and mentors and teachers and counselors and principals and ministers and coaches and presidents and people who helped me to understand that the world was bigger than what was just directly in front of me. People who helped me to get that we live in a big and a beautiful and a bright world, and I actually had a place in it. People who helped me to understand that there is never any room that I am ever in that I don't belong in. And every room that I am not there because of someone's benevolence. I am not there because of someone's kindness. I am not there because of someone's social experiment. I'm not there because someone believes in diversity and inclusion. I am there because I belong there. And I don't need to request permission to feel that way. You know, we talk about why Black History Month matters and why we can have these conversations is, I think part of the reason that it matters is because part of the thing that gave me the confidence to feel that way is because I know from whence I came. I understand and appreciate the fact that I stand here today because there were people who woke up every morning with the hope of me and who fought for the hope of me. I know that I come from the blood of Douglas and the blood of Truth and the blood of Robeson and the blood of Marshall. That the reason that we acknowledge and celebrate and learn is not simply because it's a nice thing to do, but because it's the thing that helps me to know my worth and remember my worth in every place that I'm in. What happened to me was I found myself surrounded by people who helped me to understand that the world is bigger than what was directly in front of me. People who helped me to get that there was never any accidents of birth, not being Black, not being poor, not being from Baltimore, not being from the Bronx, not being fatherless, that was ever going to limit me, that was ever going to define me, nor is it anything that I should ever be ashamed of. That it's my history that gives me my strength. That's what fundamentally made a difference, is I found myself not just comfortable in the place that I was in, but I found myself comfortable in the mental place that I was in. I remember thinking about it in respects to, as I was sitting there, in fact, the second to last time I tried to run away, I remember watching, my whole chain of command was behind me. And they're all kind of standing over me and whatever, and it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I remember being so mad and so angry. And I remember looking over my shoulder and just yelling at them, yo, stop looking at me, stop looking at me. And I looked over my right shoulder, and I'm 13, right? I looked over my right shoulder and I saw someone who I'd never seen before. He was an African-American guy. He was like 5'11", 230, and like all muscle, no neck, just like. And I remember looking at him, I said, yo, stop looking. And I got real quiet because he was really big. And he was like 18, 19 years old, and I'm 13 years old, right? And he never said a word to me. He never said a word to me. And then the next day, I saw him, because I'm in formation, I'm staying at attention. And I saw him, I knew he was talking with my TOC officer, and I knew he was talking about me, because I'm staying at attention when I'm looking out the corner of my eye, and I see him, like, and I know they're talking about me because he's pointing at me. And I'm like, yo, why does this dude keep pointing at me? And finally I see him take a step back, and he salutes my TAC officer, and my TAC officer salutes him back. And then he starts walking over to F Company, which is the older guys, the college guys, right? The 18 and 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds. And he's walking over to F Company. And I assumed that he would just fall into the back of the formation. And as soon as he walks up to the formation, somebody yells, "Company, attention!" And then 150 guys all at once just crack to attention. And he keeps on walking to the front of the formation. And the person I thought was in charge salutes him. And he salutes him back. And the person I thought was in charge then walked to the back of the formation while Captain Hill took his spot in the front. 13 years old, I saw that. And I'm looking at that out of the corner of my eye. And I'm blown away. I'm like, that dude is in charge. I had never seen anything like that before in my life. This man, when 150 guys all at once cracked to attention simply because he walked in their presence. And I'm watching that, amazed. I'd never seen anything like that before in my life. Later on, about an hour later, 45 minutes later in formation, because we all went from the main area to the mess hall. That's where we eat. They call it a mess hall for a reason. And then I see Captain Hill come to the place I'm sitting at the table, and I see him pointing me, and I see him say, "Come here." And I look at my squad leader who's sitting at the end of the table, and he's like, "He's a captain, you better hurry up and get over there." So I get up and I walk over to him, and he tells me, "I'm Captain Hill, and I'm gonna be your new big brother." He says, "If you do something right, I will be the first to know. When you do something wrong, I will be the first to know. And I hope, for your sake, that you're doing more right things than wrong things." That day, he didn't just become my big brother. He became my teacher. He became my friend. He became my big brother. He was one of the first people I called when I decided to join the Army, because I knew he'd be proud of me because he was an Army officer. When I got commissioned to become an Army officer, he was sitting right in the front row. When I got married, he was standing right here to my left. I'm still scared of him to this day. I love him because in what he told me, and what he reinforced to me, and what he made me read, and in the example that he set, he reminded me that everywhere I'm at, I belong there. And I don't need to ask anyone's permission to feel that way. Part of what happened to me, and part of the beauty of higher education, and why what you're doing here is so important, is higher education will never simply be about a piece of paper. Higher education will not be about your degree or credit accumulation or GPA. It'll be about GPS. It's about giving you that sense of direction as to not just what you want to do with your life, but what type of life are you trying to live. What I received from my experience was freedom. A freedom to dream and know that my dreams would not be laughed at. A freedom to hope and know that my hopes would actually be supported by more people than just me. Freedom. And part of our collective responsibility is to take this degree that each and every one of you are fighting towards and working towards and moving towards, and make sure that you're using that to actually instill a sense of freedom in every single person that you interact with from now on. Because a person who comes from a mindset of freedom makes very different decisions than someone who does not. A person who comes from a mindset of freedom then has a way of making decisions that their future is based on a continuance and expansion of that freedom. And I was always, as my mother told me as I was coming up, you show me a person who does not believe or who does not care about their own future, you're also showing me a person who does not care about yours either. instilling a sense of hope and freedom in someone's future is the best way of instilling that same thing in your own. You know, I'll close with, I'll occasionally do this, this show called Morning Joe that comes on MSNBC in the morning, way too early in the morning. And there's really two hosts of the show. And then everyone else is kind of like guest hosts, and they kind of bring them on for segments, or they bring them on different days and all that kind of stuff. And so we never know who the other guest hosts are going to be, or guests who are going to be on the show. You just show up, and then they look at the roster, and it tells you, okay, here's who the guests are. So I show up one morning, and I saw that during the 8 o'clock hour, one of the guests was going to be a gentleman named Harry Belafonte. Y'all gotta understand, Harry Belafonte was a king in my household, man. King. I mean, for those who don't know, Harry Belafonte was an amazing, is an amazing calypso, R&B singer, activist, you know, movie star, sex symbol. My grandmother loved his tight pants. It's true. But it wasn't just that my family loved his voice. It's that my family loved his voice. Right? It's that he made his voice mean something. It's very difficult to understand many of the movements and such that have taken place over the past 50 years and not understand the role that Harry Belafonte has played in them. Right? Difficult to talk about the civil rights movement without the word name Harry Belafonte being understood. Difficult to talk about the anti-war movements without understanding the role that Harry Belafonte played. Difficult to talk about the anti-apartheid movement without understanding the role that Harry Belafonte played. Difficult to talk about Black Lives Matter without understanding the role that Harry Belafonte plays. Harry Belafonte has just been at the tip of the spear in multiple different movements over the past 50 years. And he did it with an understanding that every single time he was opening his mouth, a new investigation was being opened on him. That's right. And he did it anyway. Whether you agree, disagree, to him it did not matter. And when he came up to the set, and again, I think he was probably like 85 years old at the time, but he came up to the set just looking regal, just came up to the set, shook everybody's hands, and he sat down. And almost as soon as he sat down, the little red light went on. And when everyone's asking these questions, there's something that just kept on sticking in my mind as I realized that I'm sitting a couple feet away from the person who my family had admired for so long, right? And the thing that I thought about was, for so many people, once they hit a certain level of success, or a certain level of celebrity, or a certain level of accomplishment, they get real quiet. And they get real quiet because they somehow feel that if I say something about anything, that I'm going to somehow hurt my own brand. And so they say nothing. Right? So it's like, well, you know, I would get involved in this issue, but I'm afraid people won't buy my sneakers.
Speak, sir.
I really would get involved in this issue, but, you know, I got a new movie coming out.
Yeah.
This is a really important issue, but, you know, I'm about to get tenure. This issue, this is a huge issue, but I just need people to buy more books first. Right? So they get quiet. And they just say nothing. And Harry Belafonte never did that. And so when he sits down and people are asking him questions, and they're asking questions about his performances at Radio City Music Hall, and they're asking questions about Carnegie Hall, and they're asking questions about his performances in Moscow and all this kind of stuff, when it came time for me to ask a question, you know, my question actually went back to this. That issue. The fact that you can't understand so many of these different movements without understanding the role, the public and private role that he played in so many of these different things. One of my favorite Mr. Belafonte stories is, you know, when Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and a group of other civil rights leaders are actually marching through Birmingham, Alabama, and they get arrested.
That's right.
Right? Arrested during a peaceful protest. Mm-hmm. And they get arrested and they spend the night in prison, and the next morning, Dr. King is handed a newspaper. In that newspaper, there's an op-ed in the newspaper, and the op-ed is entitled, "A Call for Unity." The op-ed was written by a series of Alabama clergymen who were protesting him being there, and they called his actions untimely and unwise. They called him an outside agitator. They said he's not from Birmingham, so we don't know why he's in Birmingham.
That's right.
Right? So Dr. King is reading this op-ed, and he asks for a pen. And he starts writing in the margins of the newspaper. What he was writing in the margins of the newspaper is what we all now know as a letter from a Birmingham jail. Which, in my opinion, when we talk about the top 5, top 7 pieces of American canon that have ever been written, that list is frankly incomplete if it does not include a letter from a Birmingham jail. It is brilliant. And he wrote it from a jail cell, not in front of Google. Right? In a jail cell. And, and I'll paraphrase, but, the first thing he writes in a letter from Birmingham jail, and if you haven't read it, please, I ask you to read it. And if you have read it, I read it seriously every 6 months just for a level set. And the first thing he does is he thanks them for writing this op-ed, but he says to them, I want to thank you for taking the time to write this very thoughtful message. He said, if I responded to every single piece of negative information that was ever written about me, I would never have any time to do my work. But since you're people of the cloth, and I assume you're coming from a place of peace, I'll respond. And he proceeded to dismantle every single one of their arguments in the most beautiful and insightful way. Fast forward, a few hours later, the same guard comes up to the jail cell, opens up the jail cell and says to Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy and his other leaders, he says, you're free to go. And they're like, really? They're like, yeah, you're free to go. And he said, you've been bailed out. The person who bailed him out that day was Harry Belafonte. So Harry Belafonte had been involved in this stuff for a very long time in a multitude of different ways. And when Mr. Belafonte comes up to the set, I asked him a question. I said, why did you always find it important for you to say something, even when you didn't have to, on a collection of issues that you knew might be unpopular? And he kind of looked at me and he smiled and he said, because it's more fun to live that way. And I looked at him and I was like, that's brilliant. First of all, it wasn't at all what I was expecting him to say. And the second reason is because his point that he was trying to make that day was this: if you're not going to do it to be selfless, then do it to be selfish. Right? If you're not going to do it because you feel like it's just the right thing to do, then do it because it's the right thing to do for you. Because if you really want to live in a community and really want to live in a world that you feel is hopeful and prosperous and growing, you had better make sure that everybody in that community feels like that community is hopeful and prosperous and growing too. If you want to live in a community that you feel is safe and secure, you had better make sure that everybody in that community feels like it's safe and secure. That the best way of being able to help yourself is by making sure that you're helping others. It's the best way to create an environment where everybody feels a level of security. He says he did it because he wanted to be selfish. He says he did it because he wanted to live a more interesting life. And then he capped it off by saying, there's some people who wake up in the mornings and they call their accountants. I wake up in the morning and I call Nelson Mandela. Who do you think has a more interesting life? There are some people who wake up in the morning and report to a job that in their deepest hearts they know that that job should not even exist. There are some people who wake up in the morning and they report to a location that they know that if they were to have not shown up that morning, no one would have noticed. There's some people that wake up in the morning and they head to their place of employment, and if they get laid off from that place of employment that day, that someone will be in that seat before it even becomes cold. And then there's some people who wake up in the morning knowing that every single day someone's life has benefited from the fact that they woke up that morning. And then there's some people who wake up every morning knowing that their voice matters, not just to them, but to their family, to their community, to their future. There's some people who wake up every morning knowing that the actions that they're taking every single day will be remembered long after they are no longer here. And that's what we all ask for. We ask that we get up every morning and remember to fight for the others. We ask that we get up every morning with a clear understanding that we are where we are right now because someone saw us there first. And now our job is to wake up every morning and fight so that one day in the distant future, a person who you might never even meet is standing where you hope for them to stand. And doing what you hope that they'll have the ability to do. I thank you for making sure that this history is not just something that we remember out of an obligatory service, but that this history is something that we know is core to the fabric of who we are and who we hope to be. I thank you for all your work in believing in the others. And all you students, I thank you for working towards living an incredibly interesting life. Bless you guys for all you do, and thank you so much for your time tonight. Thank you.